Hey guys, welcome to a brand new video. Today I'm going to be showcasing all the new weapons that came in the Blade & Sorcery U10 update. So the first weapon we'll be taking a look at is the Greatsword. The Greatsword is a two-handed only weapon. If you try to one-hand this weapon, the weight will be too much and you will not be able to swing it effectively. This weapon is incredibly good for large swings and knocking your opponents down, but is not actually that practical for piercing, as it is just way too long to handle effectively that way. It is incredibly good for taking out multiple opponents at once, so if you're surrounded, you can wipe down two at once with one big swing. Some other ways to use the Greatsword is its blunt power from the handle is actually incredibly effective due to its weight, being able to knock down opponents for an easy kill. And the flat side of the blade can also be used as a blunt weapon to send enemies long distances with one hit. And I think that about wraps it up for the Greatsword. Let's move on to the next weapon. And the next weapon in the swords category we're going to take a look at is the Warsaw. The Warsaw is my favourite designed weapon in the game. It just looks absolutely gorgeous. And I'm going to show you a few things with the weapon now. So the Warsaw is primarily a piercing weapon, but its slashing is incredibly effective as well. The weapon is designed to be used with two hands, but can also be held with one hand pretty well, as it doesn't actually weigh that much. You could just think of this weapon as a lightweight longsword. It's great for slashing, great for piercing, and it just moves like a shorter, lighter longsword. Surprisingly, being my favourite weapon, I actually don't have a whole lot to say about it apart from that, so we'll just go ahead and move on to the next weapon. And the next new addition to the game is the riding sword. Now this weapon is a bit of an interesting one. It didn't perform how I expected it to, although really looking at the design of it, I should have expected how it performed. So the riding sword's main strength is that it is an extremely lightweight piercing weapon. Again, another piercing weapon, but it just works so incredibly well for piercing. It would be even better if my showcase would actually show piercing and not missing, but it is what it is. There we go. So the weapon seems to do incredibly well through piercing. It does very strong damage, and the slashing isn't too bad. It's a little weaker than your average sword, but it still gets the job done. And honestly, I think that's really about it to talk about this sword. It's just a one-handed version of the Warsaw, really. So let's move on to the next one. So this next weapon's a little weird. Let's take a look at the Blacksmith Hammer. So the Blacksmith Hammer is a fairly weak blunted weapon, but it is an incredibly close range weapon as well. So it doesn't have a whole lot going for it. It is a tier 0 weapon, so that's all you can really expect from these, but I had a lot of fun using it. It's actually pretty good for knocking people out the air, and I found it's really fun to throw as well. So take that as you will. It is a rusty old little hammer. You're not going to get a whole lot out of it, but it's a cool little addition nonetheless. And I think we'll just move on to the next one. Let's go. And this next weapon's a big one. We have the War Mace. Now, the War Mace is the biggest hammer we have in the game as far as I'm aware. Pretty sure it's bigger than the sledgehammer. So the first thing you need to know about this weapon is it hits incredibly fucking hard. And when I mean incredibly fucking hard, I mean like that. Another very interesting thing about the weapon is that the end does pierce. I'm sorry, I lied in my U10 video. I got it completely wrong. I said that the weapon didn't pierce, and it does. Yeah, that hurt. Anyway, another thing this weapon is incredibly good at is swinging in wide radiuses. Since it has such a long reach, it can be used to wipe out multiple targets at once and send your enemies flying so far you won't be able to see them again. It's just an incredibly fun weapon, and this is one you should definitely give a go if you haven't already. Moving on to the next one. And the next weapon we're going to look at is the Woodcutter's Axe. Now, this axe is interesting. It's another tier 0 weapon, like the Blacksmith Hammer, but this one actually performs quite a lot better. It can 1 or 2 hit kill, it's pretty good for cutting off arms and legs and heads and so on, and it actually has a decent reach, so for a weapon that doesn't do that much damage, it's a pretty damn good weapon. I will say, I wouldn't feel bad about using this in a dungeon or a tough situation. And I'll be honest, there's not a whole lot to say about this weapon, so we're just going to move on. So the second to last weapon we have is the War Axe. Now, this axe is a much nicer version of the original one-handed axe that is still in the game. It's slightly longer and it's pretty lightweight. It's incredibly good for slicing, very quick attacks. Better for slicing than piercing. If you want to dig your axe right in someone, this isn't really the one for you. I would use the other one, as the blade of this axe doesn't really tend to go in very deep. It's more of a slashing weapon. Another interesting thing about this weapon is the back end of it can pierce, so you can use that to pierce straight into the heads of your enemies and kill them pretty much instantly. Anyway, let's move on to the final weapon of our set. So the final weapon we have to show today is the Hatchet. The Hatchet is the smallest axe in the game, and it is incredibly fun to dual wield, and it is primarily actually a throwing weapon, but can be used really effectively in close range as well, as you can see by my terrible gameplay, even in slow motion right now. These axes, unlike the War Axe, do dig in quite deep when you hit, so they are pretty good for piercing into the head if you want to get an instant kill. One thing these axes can't really do is they're not very good at dismemberment. They're more like the dagger in the way that they're small, fast, agile, and incredibly damaging if you land your hits right. Well guys, thank you so much for watching this video. I am completely covered in blood, but let's ignore that. I just want to say that this channel has been blowing up recently, but unfortunately still only 10% of you are subscribed, so let's get that number up. Really appreciate it if you enjoyed. Anyway guys, I'll see you later in a bit.